The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. The BC government wants to hear your input on how to improve our democracy. The province's Special Committee on Democratic and Electoral Reform is accepting written submissions from members of the public with something to say on topics like democratic engagement, voter participation, and models for electing MLAs. The committee is made up of 7 MLAs from across the province. One of them is Nanaimo-Lantzville's George Anderson, who spoke with me in the CHLY studio.
MLA Anderson, thank you very much for coming down to the CHLY studio. Can you tell me how you prepared for your role on this committee on democratic and electoral reform?
Well, first off, thank you to CHLY for having me on. It's great to see that after so many years, this community radio station is still up and going. It's a great and integral service to our community. So thank you for that. How did I get prepared? Well, I was appointed to this committee, and I'm grateful for the opportunity because, again, when we're talking about how we preserve and ensure that our democratic institutions are strong, it's by engaging with citizens. One of the things that I did when I was a city councillor was put forward the idea of having an electronic town hall. In this time period, it might not be exciting, but back in 2012, that was a huge thing. We ended up winning a national and provincial award for it. So for myself, it's been reading up and looking at the different types of electoral systems, but also getting ready for a tour that's coming up July 7th to 11th, where we're going to hear from British Columbians about the things that they deem to be important for our democratic institutions and on how we can also increase voter participation.
Yes, could you give me maybe a broad outline of what you view are the things that it's most important for this committee to accomplish? Like, what do you hope comes out of it?
Well, I don't think that my opinion matters most. I think it's British Columbians' views. I just happen to be an elected representative for Nanaimo-Lantzville. And so for me, I hope whatever comes out of this committee is one that reflects the viewpoints of all British Columbians, from seeing more young people engaged in our democratic systems, finding out how people in rural communities can best ensure that they always have consistent, available services when it comes to our electoral system through Elections BC. We really have to go through the public hearing process and speak to British Columbians, and I look forward to seeing what comes out of that process.
What did you make maybe before your time in provincial politics? In 2018, there was a referendum on electoral reform. What did you make of that whole process?
At that point in time, the provincial government went out and they said, hey, we're going to talk again about possibly changing the electoral system because, as you will know, there was also a referendum back in 2008 and then 2005. So this has been a question that's been studied quite a bit in British Columbia about if we didn't have the current system that we do, which is a winner takes all, what would the other systems be? And there were 3 other systems that were proposed. And in that decision by the electorate, they said we were going to keep the current system we have, which is first past the post. So here we are going to study how we can increase voter participation, preserve and strengthen our democratic institutions. And again, we'll see what the outcome is from the conversations that we have with British Columbians.
So voter participation, it was the voter turnout in the provincial election, I believe was around 58% last year. What would you like to see that number at? Do you have any ideas on how that could go up?
Well, I would love to see more people participating. We look to other places in the world where there are higher voter turnouts. Interestingly, when you go down to local government, you see rates even lower in the 20s, and for the school board, even less. So I think we have to try to find ways to meet people where they're at. Some countries have looked at using electronic voting. Some have looked at mandatory voting. I think we just have to figure out what is a made in British Columbia solution, because we can't institute something that might work in one country that doesn't work here in BC. We have rural communities, we have urban communities. We have to find ways that ensure that everyone has equal access. And I think we currently do, but ways that we can ensure that it is easier for people to participate in our democratic system. And that doesn't only just mean voting. That means, how do we engage people in what the institution of British Columbia is? Many people have never visited the legislature of British Columbia. Do people understand the differences between the opposition and government? Do they understand the different roles of parliamentary secretaries versus cabinet ministers? Could that be something that's integrated into our education system in a bit better way? And that's what we're going to hopefully hear from British Columbians on what they think we could be doing differently and how government can better uphold and represent the values of all British Columbians.
Now, it's still early days for this committee, but you have had a few meetings already. Is there anything you can share about what you've heard so far? I of the understanding that some of it is along the lines of what you just said, with officials from Elections BC flagging, like maybe there needs to be more civic education or more even just media coverage about like the way this works rather than kind of temporal of the moment issues.
And we have met with the Chief Electoral Officer for British Columbia, gave us a great presentation on the work that they're doing. I think one of the things that we have to be looking at is just how the world has changed. When I was a kid, the main form of media was cable news, it was newspapers, and we are now seeing a reduction in those type of services for people. A lot of individuals are now using social media. Do we need to be utilizing social media in a different way? These are the type of things that the committee is tasked with bringing a report back to government on our findings, and this committee is chaired by MLA Jessie Sunner from the electoral district of Surrey-Newton, and she's doing a great job of making sure that we're getting that information and also getting prepared to talk to more British Columbians. But right now, the information that we've been doing is trying to prepare us to be able to go out to the community and also speak to various experts about what we can do to, one, strengthen our democratic institutions and also strengthen voter participation.
How do you think you can strengthen people's maybe trust in both politicians and the political system in general? I'm thinking especially, through the lens of yes, there's this committee, but each member of the committee, represents their own political party. How do you kind of navigate that aspect of it when you're talking about like broader institutional reform and trust in institutions?
Mm-hmm. That is a difficult question, and I can tell you one thing for myself is, yes, I ran under a BC New Democrat banner, but once I'm elected, I see myself as the elected representative for the entire district of Nanaimo-Lantzville and a representative in representing individuals in British Columbia. Transit services are not a partisan issue. How people interact with government is not a partisan issue. Healthcare is not and should not be a partisan issue. So when I am doing my job, I'm thinking about how do I ensure that British Columbians have the best possible life that there is. And that means there has to be more discussion about how young people are engaging in civics, for example. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and I know that that's something that we also have to combat. And as we continue to have these discussions through the committee, I think this is one of the ways that we actually do strengthen our democratic institutions by continuing to go out to the public and hear what they believe is important so that they can see themselves reflected in our institutions.
And this is your first term in the legislature. This is all still fairly new to you, I imagine. And, for a provincial level politician, you're relatively young. Can you tell me from your first impressions, maybe what you make of our democratic institutions coming into them with fresh eyes?
I appreciate the comment. I haven't seen some of the gray hairs, but what I see is a system in which people have hopes and desires for what the outcomes are in our communities across British Columbia. And sometimes they aren't seeing that and they aren't feeling it immediately. And so my job is to try to connect with those people where they're at. Some of the things I've done since being elected in October is I've held a town hall where people were able to ask me questions about whatever was on their minds. On June 13th, I believe it was, I held another town hall about seniors and long-term care. As you may know, we are going to be building a long-term care facility in Lantzville that will service central Vancouver Island. It gave me an opportunity to hear, and I also brought the Parliamentary Secretary for Seniors and Long-Term Care, Susie Chant, the MLA for North Vancouver Seymour, to Nanaimo, so she could also hear what my residents and the residents of Nanaimo-Lantzville were saying about their desire for that long-term care facility. I also go out and speak to people in the community. I go out and door knock, and I can tell you I was out door knocking a weekend ago, and people said, "Is there an election coming?" I said, "No, I'm just here to hear what you believe we need to be focusing on in government, and if you have any concerns." I think these are the ways that we go to build further trust in our electoral systems and also give people the opportunity to access the system that is supposed to be benefiting them. And that's really what my job is. I am a representative. I'm there to be the person who takes the issues, concerns, hopes, and desires of my community to Victoria to ensure that they're represented appropriately.
So then, on this issue of democratic and electoral reform, if there are folks in Nanaimo-Lantzville who are really passionate on this, have thoughts that they want to share, what are the ways they can do that, either officially through the committee or elsewhere in the community?
Well, there is a forum through the Government of British Columbia or through the Legislative Assembly's website. They can also email me directly. They could email the members of the committee, which all of our names are there. We're also going on a tour from July 7th to 11th to hear from different people. There will be a public presentation in Vancouver, Cranbrook, Creston. These are the opportunities, I would say, to individuals can let their elected officials know about what they want to see done differently. There are 93 members of the Legislative Assembly. If you have a concern or think that we can do something differently, send those concerns to your elected representatives, which include me. In the southern part of Nanaimo, it's MLA Malcolmson. In Parksville, Qualicum, then Ladysmith, it is MLA Stephanie Higginson. People should reach out because that's what we're there to do, is to take people's values and their concerns and their hopes for British Columbia to Victoria. Again, I represent about 58, almost 59,000 people. Sometimes those viewpoints are going to clash, but at least if I don't hear from people, I won't know. So reach out to your elected officials. If you're not in Nanaimo-Lantzville, reach out to your elected representative in whatever riding you're in.
George Anderson is MLA for Nanaimo-Lantzville and Parliamentary Secretary for Transit. He also sits on the Special Committee for Democratic and Electoral Reform, which was the subject of our conversation. The committee is accepting written submissions until July 25th. There's a form you can fill out online to make those submissions. You can find a link to it in the show notes for this episode on our website, chly.ca/Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada and generous listeners like you. Support and grow our nonprofit newsroom project today at chly.ca/donate with a monthly or one-time donation. With your support, we can expand Midcoast Morning from 2 to 3 original programs per week to cover local news, current affairs, and arts and culture.
2 BC twin brothers are calling for the voting age to be lowered to 16. Jerry and Jason Song are 18 years old and live in West Vancouver. They're co-directors of Vote 16 BC. They argue that a change to the voting age would increase youth participation in the political process and help keep people engaged through their whole lives.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Song. I'm the older brother of Jerry. We're twins, unfortunately. I would like to say I'm the better looking one, but I don't know. That's subjective.
Most would disagree.
I think I guess in terms of introduction, we are both recent high school graduates, and we are both co-hosts and co-directors of our own nonpartisan political podcast called Twin Talk Politics, and we're also co-directors and co-leads of Vote 16 BC, which I'm sure is the main topic we're here to talk about today. And our goal is to lower the voting age in BC.
Hi, I'm Jerry. I'm the younger brother of Jason, but pretty much everything he said symmetrically applies to me. We pretty much live very similar lives, if not the same one. So we were very fortunate enough to start volunteering at our local MP's office, where we really got to see the inner workings of government and the mechanisms of how a parliamentarian really worked up close. And whether it was through engaging with constituents, listening to conversations, and reading real-time correspondence that really made us understand, and we visibly saw a glaring gap. And that gap was the absence of youth. You know, after you read a lot of emails from your own constituents, you start to see a pattern. And when there's not a lot of emails from young people, very few issues raised on their own behalf, and their voices and opinions were largely, if not completely absent from political conversation, it really got us thinking, why? You know, why are not more youth voices at the table? A question that we ask in each one of our episodes is, how can youth play a more active role within a democracy? And a recurring answer, and I would say a recurring theme, was how we needed to extend the voting right to 16 and 17-year-olds. So this was what inevitably got us involved with the national movement of Vote 16 to really foster a more inclusive, youth-engaged democracy. So now we're very grateful that our podcast is now listed as collaborators of the national movement Vote 16 Canada. And obviously right now, Jason and I are spearheading Vote 16 BC.
So, Jason, you're interviewing all of these parliamentarians and you're interviewing people in positions of power, and presumably you're raising this idea of lowering the voting age to 16. How does that go over? What do people in positions of authority say when you do that?
For sure. Yeah, going back on sort of what Jerry talked about, at the original question, and the question we still asked is, you know, how can youth play a more formal part in our democracy? And originally, I guess to this day still, a common recurring theme is lowering the voting age to 16. And that's when we started questioning and making that a separate question in of itself, which is, you know, along the lines of, you know, when there was still the bill in the House of Commons, which is Bill C-210, we would ask, you know, what are your stances on this? What do you think? And, you know, there's been such an overwhelming support of so many parliamentarians across the spectrum. So whether that's in the Green Party, whether that's in the Independent Party, whether that's the Liberals, whether that's, you know, the NDPs or the Greens, there's so much, you know, overwhelming support, both in terms of the House of Commons as well as the Senate. So if you look at the Senate, there has been such a long history of, you know, bills, private member bills, you know, pushing and advocating to extend the voting age to 16. So if you look at the Senate right now, in the previous sitting, Senator McFedrin, you know, proposed the bill S-201, and that received so much overwhelming support. And I believe it actually made the second reading. And now this sitting, I think if we can flip a few more seats with our new bill, Bill S-222, a great number. Hopefully that can, you know, definitely turn that into legislation. I think, you know, we hear a lot of support, but we also hear an overwhelming number of arguments as to why we should extend the voting rights to 16. I'm not sure if this is the place where I just plug in a few arguments of why people tend to support 16-year-olds voting. Is that the...
Well, what do you think? I would imagine that you get arguments in favor of it. Do you get people saying, whoa, hold up, for reasons X, Y, and Z, we feel like this isn't a good idea? What is the kind of opposition you get?
For sure. Yeah. I guess Jerry and I can both speak to it. So Jerry, whenever you want to speak, just jump in. Yeah, definitely it's not, you know, a fairy tale world where everyone just comes on and say, yes, we support Vote 16 Canada or Vote 16 BC or Vote 16, wherever they are. Obviously, we do hear a lot of, you know, people who, you know, critics, people who disagree, no-sayers, and they do raise some arguments. So the main common arguments are the ones you hear automatically. And I think these are the intuitive ones that jump to mind, which people to this day still, support and back, which is the idea, like youth are not mature enough. They don't work jobs. They have not maturity yet. They don't have any sense of maturity. They don't have enough life experiences. They're just too immature to vote. And I think a lot of the arguments stem from a place that I don't think is very just, first of all. And I think the second bit of it is I think there's a lot of double standards, which I think I can speak to. And I think the problem here is that the main opposition stems from a place of inconsistent standards and a lack of mutual exclusivity. So I'll speak on this a bit more. Jerry, whenever you want to jump in, go ahead. But, critics often say 16-year-olds are too, impressionable to disinformation or misinformation, yet so are adults. They say teens vote just like their friends or families, but so do adults. And some argue that, teens don't work, but neither do full adults. If we're holding youth to, I think, a higher bar than adults, I think we have to ask, are we prepared to make, every adult prove that, they're informed enough that they're not impressionable to disinformation or misinformation, or the fact that they don't vote like their spouse or their friends or family, or are they competent enough to vote? And I think the obvious answer to that is, of course not, because that's just not how democracy works. And it shouldn't work that way. And I don't think it should work any differently for any young person.
What do you view as the pathway to getting this change implemented? I know you talked already about some of what's going on in the Senate, but potentially provincially or Vote BC, what do you see as the pathway to getting this change?
For sure. So I guess I'll speak on it. So as part of Vote 16 Canada, or like the campaign as a whole, I think there's three different facets to it, right? So the first facet is municipally. And what that does, I guess I'll speak to own personal experience, but I want to note that, as we're part of Vote 16 BC, but obviously there's amazing campaigns all around Canada that are winning. So what this means is that at the municipal level, we go in front of council, and then in front of mayor and council, we often request two things that we consider a win. The first one of which is a letter of endorsement or support. And that's where the majority of mayor and council say and cast a vote and say, I support individual as a councillor or as a mayor, I support, extending the voting right to 16 and 17-year-olds. And when the majority votes on it and the majority agrees, as a council together, they will send often a letter to the premier and the minister of municipal affairs saying, as council, as a municipality, we support this. And I want to know that to this day, there's been 17 endorsements, which is a crazy amount of numbers. So that's really great. The second pathway that's becoming more common is asking council, because this falls under municipal jurisdiction, which is the fact that, we can go up and ask if 16-year-olds are allowed to vote in neighborhood polls. And I think that oftentimes also gets passed. So if you look at Toronto, I believe there has been a motion or a bill. I believe it's a motion, but 16-year-olds are allowed to now vote in neighborhood polls, which is really, really exciting. And the way as to why you don't hear as to why can't we just ask the municipality to let 16 and 17-year-olds in municipal election? Well, voting in municipal elections falls under jurisdiction of the provincial government. And that brings us to our second facet, which is the idea of what are we doing provincially? I think provincially, if you look at historically, there's been so much support. I believe in 2019, I think the NDP caucus, there was a unanimous support for Vote 16, which is really, really exciting. It has been brought up in the legislature, I think, quite a bit of time. I believe the last time it was 2022 by a Green MLA, I believe, but that definitely got conversations going. And I believe Premier Evie said something along the lines of, it's not something that he's fully against, and it's something that, should definitely be spoken about more. But this summer, there's actually been a great opening that's coming up, and that's the Special Committee on Democratic and Electoral Reform. And Jerry and I will be going there to present later in July. And Jerry, do you want to speak a little bit more about what the committee sort of does?
Yeah, so it's under the actual legislature, and the legislature created a special committee, and their entire purpose is simply to ensure and to look at the past electoral data and ensure that people are getting represented, and B, explore various avenues to in order to change how MLAs are getting elected in the very first place. So mainly, this is looking at proportional representation. But I think what's really important to note here is that they're listening from everyone. So whether you're a constituent, whether you're an international expert or a national expert or just a local expert or has something to say, you can actually raise your voice and sign up and attend the council. And what we're hoping is the various different, I would say, people are presenting. So I think as a delegation, Jason and I are going to be presenting, but there's various other delegations. We know the BC Student Union, Student Federation are also going to be presenting along with a lot of different delegations, each voicing their own opinions. But what ends up happening is after presenting to the special committee, they then adjourn and they talk about whether or not they want to support, for example, extending the voting age to 16. And if they do believe that this is a worthy cause, they will increase representation for a greater amount of people on a greater aggregate level. Then in the next legislative sitting, they will then propose this to the entire legislature. And hopefully then they will obviously, go through the formal democratic processes and see if the majority of the legislature agrees. And if that happens, then it can be passed into bill, passed into motion, and then eventually passed into law. So that's eventually what we're hoping for. But the first step is really getting the support of the special committee.
Jason and Jerry Song, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Jerry and Jason Song are involved with the Vote 16 BC campaign, which advocates lowering the voting age in the province to 16 years old. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and RB Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. Also, share the podcast with your friends. While Meta is blocking Canadian users from sharing news content on their Facebook feeds, you can still share our podcast directly with your friends via Facebook or Instagram Messenger. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.